Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you on this Tuesday to bring you another author interview. I had a really lovely conversation with author JB Jamison about his Emily Graham series. They are thrillers. They are loaded with action, adventure, conspiracy. They're definitely one phrase that JB says throughout the interview is "what if," and you really get that sense when you're reading through these books. What if? What if this were to happen? What if that actually did happen? They're page turners in that they're going to keep you thinking about a lot of things that you might not even want to be thinking about because they could actually happen. So what if? Let me go ahead and give you the description from the first book, which is called Disruption. In the midnight darkness north of New Orleans, the towboat's routine trip up the Mississippi River becomes something far more deadly. Captain Charlie Graff is suddenly thrust into the middle of one of the most twisted domestic terrorist plots ever conceived. He has to use his skill as captain to protect his crew, his boat, his river, and his country. But he is not alone. On land, already overwhelmed FBI agent Emily Graham finds herself thrust into the role of leading the pursuit of the terrorists. Her journey leads to the dead ends and dead witnesses. She discovers her trust in her team members is wrong, the terrorists are not who they say they are, and that the people who actually initiated the attack don't exist. This tense, fast-paced thriller is a 1,000-mile journey with more twists and turns than the river that carries it. A story that begins and ends with betrayal. Betrayal that has but one goal: disruption. And twists and turns is definitely a good way to describe this book in particular, because every time you think you're going in one direction, something comes in and you realize, nope, we're going in a different direction. There's a lot of things that you might not see coming. There's a lot of things that just come out of feels like nowhere until later when things get explained. It's a really interestingly put together story, and it's a thriller. It's a little bit dark. It's not got the happiest of subject matters. When you hear the interview, John is really engaging and he's got a great sense of humor. This isn't a comedy. The book is not a comedy, but you can still get John's sense of humor through the book. There's just little hints of sarcasm or sometimes snark. You can get little glimmers of that sense of humor that come through, and that really makes the book more human and the characters more likable, because there are those little bright spots of humor. Never inappropriate humor, but just those bits of humor that pop through as you are going through this crazy scenario of what if. So let's go ahead now and turn to the interview with John so you can hear what he has to say about the Emily Graham series. Before we start the interview, I always forget to say this, but I have copies of both Disruption and the second book, Distraction, to give away. There's a third book, Disbelief, coming out first part of April. I do not have copies of that yet, but if you're interested in getting to know Emily as a character and getting to know this series, then I do have copies of both of the first two books in this series to give away. Stay tuned until the end to find out how to enter that contest. In the meantime, let's turn to that interview with author JB Graham about his excuse me, author JB Jamison about his Emily Graham series.
Good morning, John, and welcome to the podcast.
Sarah, hey, thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I just realized it's not morning for you because of the time difference, but that's okay. Good day.
At least we both got here at the same time. I usually flip it all around, and I normally would have showed up around 3 o'clock. But so, yeah, we're here. We made it. Time zones and I have issues.
I understand. Well, besides your issues with time zones, we are here to talk about your Emily Graham series. And before we get to the book, I would love for the listeners to get to know you a little bit. So if you could share a bit about your life, that would be great.
All right. I hate this question, by the way, because I never know which direction to go. I'm going to pick one. And if there's questions, you let me know. I came from a small river town in Illinois, 5,000 people. It's in the middle of nowhere. You either were on the river with jobs or the railroad. That was about it. Then there was that group of people who did things like, the mayor and that, but we didn't pay much attention to those folks. Mm-hmm. My father's side of the family was all river folks, all people working on towboats and stuff. For up until about 5 years ago, I was the only male on my dad's side of the family that did not go to work on the river. I was the freak that went to college. I still pay a price for that at family reunions. My mother's side was all railroaders, and anybody familiar with them know that riverboaters and railroaders they're both in the transportation business. They're competitors. They don't get along. So family get-togethers that's where I first got really intrigued with the idea of stories, because if we could get everybody telling stories, they kind of got into this competitive thing and quit arguing. So that's when I first started thinking, hey, there's power in stories. So I grew up there, went to college, ended up spending the first 20-some years of my career as a United Methodist minister. I was a pastor in churches, but most of my time during seminary, I also trained as a pastoral counselor, took courses in pastoral psychotherapy, all that kind of stuff. So spent most of my time, in addition to the preaching and all that kind of stuff, most of my time in some counseling role, and somehow ended up spending most of that time dealing with death and dying and being with people at those major life change periods. And part of that, too, I began to realize as I was with people going through this, what they were having to do was create a whole new story about themselves. And, I had one of those moments when, okay, we got to write a new story. And we quit talking about just stages of grief or whatever. And we started imagining, what if, or what, anyway, that led into kind of one of those moments where I wondered why some people had those tragic life experiences, but ended up eventually coming through them. And others had the same type of experience and I just stayed there. They got stuck. And I started to figure out, at least to my satisfaction, that the people who were able to rewrite a story were the people who were able to learn. They were able to relearn and learn new things. Those who got stuck were kind of like my folks who were the learned. They had everything figured out. The idea of learning or changing, no. So they got stuck. So then I got all interested in, learning, education. After 22, 23 years, I changed careers, went back to school, got another graduate degree, and went into education. My second week of being at the college getting my degree, I was asked to come to a meeting with the president and a bunch of faculty. I also had some technology background just from messing around. I was asked to come to a meeting and kind of referee this group of very angry faculty members who were upset because these students today won't pay attention, they won't read, they won't listen, all they want to do is play games. I found myself in that meeting doing counseling again, the same thing. We had this group of learned people who really didn't know how to adjust. They were all PhDs, which I need to be careful because I'm one now too. But I found myself doing the same thing. I left that meeting actually hired in a position as the director of academic computing, which didn't exist until then. My job was to help them change, help the school and the faculty change to deal with the new group of learners. That led to about the next 10 or 12 years at 3 or 4 different universities doing that. I ended up at one of the national for-profit schools. I was hired. They're a traditional school. They'd started a program in game development, and we're getting it's a school for engineers, and suddenly they got all these crazy game people coming in here, and the program was in trouble. I was hired to come in and basically do the same thing I'd been doing, and did that for a couple of years, ended up at a human services organization doing the same thing. In every one of those situations, all I did was go in and help people create a story. And that finally started clicking, and my wife and I started our own business working with schools. We still do that, working with schools and businesses, helping them develop new ways of teaching, new ways of training. But as I'm getting older, I finally decided, I've always thought of writing and wanted to, and especially the first book, Disruption, that's kind of what really got me going. And I finally decided, well, let's just do that. Let's take stories and let's really take the power of story and put it into stories. So I'll stop there. That's the thing.
Okay.
How's that?
That's great. Thank you. That's really interesting, actually. I enjoyed hearing that transition or that journey and how the stories really tied everything, together and sent you in this direction of how you became a writer. So that was great. And you did mention that it kind of led to writing the first book, Disruption. And so let's talk about the Emily Graham series. What was your inspiration for the series and the character?
In the beginning, there was no series and there was no character. It started about 35 years ago. My dad was still on the towboats. He was a captain on the river, on the Mississippi, Ohio rivers. And I woke up one morning with this really crazy idea. I had seen something on TV, and I had talked to Dad and I said, "Hey, I got this idea about something that happens on a towboat." And I told him that, and he looked at me, he laughed and said, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Don't waste your time. That could never happen. That's just stupid." So I put it aside, didn't think anything of it. 3 years ago, the last conversation I had with Dad before he died, he'd had dementia for several months. We hadn't had an actual conversation for a long time. I took him to the airport. He was going to go down and visit my sister, and we were sitting in the car, and he turned and looked at me, and he said, "Do you remember that story you told me long, long time ago?" And I was kind of surprised. I said, "Yeah." He said, "That scared the heck out of me. That could really happen. I just didn't want to think about it while I was out there. You need to write that down." And that's where Disruption came from. I didn't know Emily Graham was in it until I got to the chapter where somebody from the FBI had to show up. And as I started writing that chapter, as I was writing, something about the door opened and she, and I said, "What do you mean she? Wait a minute." And I stopped and looked up. That's where my characters come from. That's where Emily came from. My characters kind of have a life of their own, and it's a constant surprise. But the goal at that point was just to get that book written. There was no thought of a series. I didn't think I was capable of a series. I didn't think I was capable of finishing the first book. But as I got to know Emily and some of the others who came in, they took things over. Sometimes I worry about my mind, to be honest with you.
You're in good company Emily, with other authors.
I think so. Yeah. But it took on a life of its own. And when I finished with the first book, I thought, well, I got one done. I am now one of those people who can say I actually wrote a novel. Good. It's not just in the drawer. I put it aside. I mean, did all the stuff. We self-published that one just to see what that was like. And a month or so later, I stumbled across something in the news, and Emily started talking to me again. I wake up from a dream, and all right. And that led to the second book. And when that one was finished, Emily wasn't finished, and That led to the third one that's coming out next month, and she's already harping about the fourth one. So that's where the series came from.
Well, she is a very stubborn character, so I'm not surprised that she's still talking to you.
I am going to jump in here now because we do have to take our first break of the podcast, but I will say that I love when authors talk about how the characters talk to them and that they have these ongoing conversations, and sometimes the characters do things that they are not expecting. I've had that experience, not necessarily with characters in something I'm writing, but with other things that I've worked on. And so it always makes me feel better when other people have those experiences of fictional characters changing the course of something that they're working on. So we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the Emily Graham series. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We are talking today with author JB Jamison about his Emily Graham series. At the beginning of the episode, I gave you the description of the first book in the series, Disruption. Before we continue with the interview, I want to go ahead and give you the description of the second book, Distraction. There have always been people warning us that technology could not be trusted. Someone might use it against us, they said. Someone might find a way to take the things we have created to serve us and use them as a way to destroy us, they said. Today, it looks like those people may have been right. A small group of men with power to do anything they desire has chosen to use that power to make their empires even larger. After 10 years of preparation, the attacks begin. But something goes wrong. Once again, Agent Emily Graham finds herself in the role of having to uncover the truth of what is happening, who is behind it, and how to stop it. And once again, she discovers that sometimes what you see and hear is not reality. It is just distraction. So, as we were talking about before the break, Emily, as a character, just kept talking to John, and that led to the second book. He hadn't envisioned it originally as a series. And so Emily said, nope, we're not done here. And that's led to the second book and a third book, possibly a fourth book that's in the works. So Emily's not going anywhere for a while. But we are going to go back to the interview.
And actually, that does answer some questions, because in the first book, it's told from a lot of different perspectives. So if you're going in thinking, oh, this is about Emily Graham, she's kind of the star of the series, then you're thinking, oh, she doesn't even show up for a while. So yeah. That's really interesting how she just kind of materialized through that process.
It's been a real growth thing, just the whole thing. The first book was about the story. It wasn't about any particular character. The main character, I guess, was the boat. That was the point of that. I was just taking that idea, and that was the goal. Out of that, Emily came as but there are some others who have stuck around as well, and that it's just been fun to see them keeping going like they're going. It's a surprise to me.
Yeah.
I wish I could say I was smart enough to plan it, but I didn't.
So as Emily is kind of emerged as at least one of the main characters and the namesake of the series, what about her do you think will resonate with readers?
I think part of it that I hear from folks who have been reading, one is a lot of folks say, she just seems like she really exists, which is kind of nice. She seems believable. She is stubborn. That some folks like that. Some folks have commented on the fact that Emily is in some ways like many of us. She's an Oreo person. She's stuck between her life and this life of her father, and she's experiencing being a caregiver and going through all of the stuff that my wife and I have gone through and are going through with parents, and how many folks have talked with me and say, yeah, I get it. I get what she's feeling. And I think that's a lot of it. I think the other thing is, it was kind of surprised me. Folks have commented just on how she talks. She sounds real, which got me doing a lot of thinking about dialogue and how I do that. The other thing, I think, for anyone who does read the first and then the second and then hopefully the third, she like us, the stories change her. She's not the same person in book 2, definitely not in book 3. And at the end of book 3, it's another, so she has that part of her is real. I've read some, the old Sherlock Holmes books. Sherlock's same in book 1 pretty much as in book 11, whatever. I love them. That's not a critique. But I think just the fact that she seems real is what I hear a lot.
Yeah. So talk about the second book then, Distraction. Can you give us a brief synopsis of that story?
Sure. Distraction, like I say, I had no plans for that. And when I finished Disruption, I thought I was done. And then I came across a news article about something that happened in St. Louis. And my first reaction when I read it was, this can't be real. This is more fake news kind of stuff. So I started doing researching and found out, this is not only it's real, it's happening right now. And then Emily started telling me, here's what we need to do about this. And and I started imagining, okay, if Emily, what would happen here? And it grew from that. The story involves, part of the theme of the story involves hacking, computer hacking. That doesn't give anything critical away, which is a very real thing. And with my background in technology, that interests me. I was concerned about doing much about that because for a lot of folks, it could become so techno-babble that folks might, really turn folks off. But I think we ended up showing the impact of very real impacts that have happened that nobody talks about today that lead to what's going on in St. Louis. So I think that's in all of my books, and maybe this is part, and we may be going in this direction, but really I felt it with Distraction since the story hadn't been in my head for 30 years. The situations in the books are very real situations. The thing with the boat in book 1 could happen. The risks are there. The bad guys who get their hands on stuff they shouldn't have, that has happened. I did the research and found there's a scene in book 1 where we're told some guys stole something out of the back of a truck. I had one person read it and said, that would never happen. That's just silly. Well, I sent them the news article from Connecticut where it did happen. Everything in the books could happen. The hacking things, instead of getting into the technical stuff, I based it on the fact that, people can, if they wanted to, could hack. What kind of car do you drive? Well, never mind.
Never mind.
Very good. Yeah, the odds are very good that if somebody wanted to, they could hack into your car. And while you're driving down the road, they could take control of maybe your radio, your air conditioning, your power steering, turn off your brakes, depending on the model. Those are very real things. And the more I read about those and what was happening in St. Louis, Emily and I began to think, why aren't people talking about these things? And so that became, we need to talk about these things. So that's, yeah.
No, I'm fascinated by how all of this came about because as I was reading the first book, and you should never assume, but there's a conversation between two characters, and the one character specifically says, we create disruption and distraction. And I thought, see, he's got this whole planned out. And now I find out that it's not quite as cut and dried as that.
Well, when that happened, I remember when that line first showed up on my screen, it wasn't a conscious thing, but I suddenly, I stopped at that point and said, you mean there's somebody behind all of this? And, and then and I think that came from, I'd been doing a lot of thinking. that was written a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I remember after the election and all the other political and global stuff going on, I just had the thought one day that is it coincidence that this could all be happening in so many different places around the world? What if there was some group somewhere who was just pulling the strings? And that came to me one day driving, and I just threw it away. Well, that came back, and that idea that has appeared now is a part of the continuing story. It comes back in the third book, big time in the fourth one that's just getting started. And I have to tell you, it's turned me into, especially the third book, it's turned me into not necessarily a conspiracy theorist kind of guy, but it makes me a little nervous. Yeah. Because with so much going on in every corner of the globe, is it a coincidence? I still think it probably is. But what if? Right. And I think that's where it's at in the book. What if?
Yeah. So let's look at that third book then. It's called Disbelief. When does it come out, and what can you tell us about the new story?
Disbelief is on the calendar for April 1st. We're just getting ready to bring that out. Disbelief follows, Emily Graham is brought back. It's another, I hadn't originally planned that topic. When I finished the second book, I kind of thought there might be a third. But this one, one day I came across an article, I think it was the New York Times, about a politician in our country and in another country. And I was looking at some of the things they had written and said, and I had to stop and go, really? This is real? And so I began researching, going through, websites like whether it's FBI, CIA, a lot of the declassified stuff, and found out that this is not only real, but he's not the only one, and began getting, realizing there is, in reality, at least on some scale, there is a group, within our political structure who have some ideas and plans they want to carry out that are going to call for changing the Constitution. And they even know how to do that, and they're in the process. And so, again, I'm sounding like one of those people I laugh at when I hear them on the radio. But, these are documented pieces, and the politician that I stumbled across, he admits this. He says, absolutely, that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here. That's what we need to be doing. And for him and for others, it turns out to be he wants to bring about changes that are in line with his core personal beliefs. That got me thinking. Emily Graham is a strong-willed person, a determined woman. She has her beliefs. What would happen if somebody else basically said, no, you're not going to follow your beliefs anymore. You're going to follow our beliefs. And that's the framework that led to Disbelief. That's the core that's behind it. How it unfolds, I learned things that,
Okay. I was going to ask you if you have a set number of books in mind for the series, but it sounds like they wouldn't let you stick to that plan anyway.
I don't. I think there will be, there will be 4. The next, I don't know if there'll be. I've got other things I want to do as well. I have a whole other series that is sitting here that I'd like to do. So I really don't know. Yeah. It'll be fun to find out.
Before we find out, though, we are going to take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we will be taking a different direction and talking about something called a squirt lock. You definitely want to find out what that word actually means. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I mentioned before the break that you were going to find out what the word squirtlock is all about. Before we get to that, I do want to give you the third and final description of the upcoming Emily Graham book that is coming out the first part of April, and that book is called Disbelief. Agent Emily Graham is who she is today because of her family, because of her friends and colleagues, and because of her absolute belief that everyone should be treated fairly. She sees it as her role to make sure that those who do unfair things pay a price. She is a woman being true to her beliefs. But what happens when a group decides that their beliefs are the only acceptable ones and everyone else, including Agent Emily Graham, must bow their heads and surrender to them? What happens when one by one those things Emily believes in are shaken? Her belief in family, her belief in friends and colleagues, and even her role as a protector of fairness. Emily Graham has faced difficult times before, but in this third book of this series, the greatest battle is a personal one. Will she bow? Will she survive? If she survives, who will she become? In this third battle with a powerful enemy, Emily Graham is faced with completely redefining her life as she finds herself living in a world of disbelief. So that is the description of the upcoming third Emily Graham book, Disbelief. Sounds very intriguing. Sounds like a lot more what-ifs are going to come into play. But I did promise you scored locks, so let's go back to that interview, and you can find out what the heck I am talking about with that crazy word.
In the meantime, though, when Emily's not yammering at you for a new story, you do write children's books under the name of Pops Jamison, and your grandkids call you Pops. So talk about your children's books a little bit.
Yeah, that's a totally different mindset, but the goal is the same. For the adult fiction, the whole idea above everything else is just to tell a good story. Because a good story gives us a chance. My goal is to create an experience for the reader, something emotional to get them away, something else to think about. It's the same thing for the kids. I've written children's things for many years, things that we've used in schools and others. Finally decided to turn some of them into books, and I've been watching our two grandkids, and, kids early on are the greatest storytellers in the world. They, and guess what, and guess what, and then, and it's just marvelous. I noticed as they get older, for our grandson, I think it was second grade, I began to notice that magic was dimming a little bit. He was the same kid, but he was being educated and structured, and taught that, stories are fine, but, mathematical tables, multiplication, those, and I noticed that the light in his eyes was changing. I'm not mashing education. That's not my point. But I started looking at things he was reading, and it's the same for our granddaughter who's just getting to that point. I was looking at the things that he was reading, and they're good books, a lot of the modern stuff, but most all of them, in addition to being good story, had some type of a lesson. There was something to be taken away. When I write children's stories, I've gone to author things, and people say, "So what's the point? What's the moral? What's the whatever?" Well, I can just tell you there aren't any to my stories. The series I'm doing with the children's right now is about the squirtlock. The squirtlock is a character that 40 years ago, I hate to say that, I was sitting in a rocking chair holding my daughter, who was, I think, it was 38 years ago because she was 2. We were sitting in a rocking chair in the middle of the night. She was sick and just feeling miserable. We had done everything else, and just sitting there rocking, I made up a song. I started humming and then started adding words to it. And the words were about this creature called a squirdlock. I don't know where it came from. Wish I had a squirdlock, a funny-looking dog, ears just like an elephant, a nose just like a hog. And it went on, and that story the squirdlock has been a part of our family forever. The squirdlock, when you do something really stupid, you look at somebody and go, oh, you squirdlock. Well, a couple of years ago, we were talking to the grandkids about the squirdlock. I had tried drawing a picture of the squirdlock before. I had actually had illustrators help. We were going to create a picture of the squirdlock, and it just didn't work. And I tried writing, and it just didn't work. So we were with the grandkids down there one day, and Emily said, what does he look like? So I got a piece of paper and a pencil, and I just started scribbling. I am not an artist. But I said, okay, ears like an elephant, and nose like a hog, all that. And I got it done. It was pitiful. And I said, well, it's kind of like this, but not really. And then I heard the squirdlock say, hey, you forgot my shoes. So, okay. So I drew shoes on it, and the squirdlock said, well, what about some color? So we got watercolors, and we colored in the squirdlock, and I'm no artist. The paint was lousy. It bled around the edges. There were pencil marks showing. And then the squirdlock said, so now are you going to write my book or what? And this is how it happens. I told you I worry about my mind sometimes. That was the origins of the squirdlock. The first book was Meet the Squirdlock, which basically tells the story of where he comes from. I got with illustrators to have it done right, and it just didn't work. I ended up using my own art as the illustrator, and again, I am no artist, but overall it made sense. And what I tell people for these, first of all, I write them not to teach a lesson. I write them not to create, not to win the New York Times bestseller list as great literature, but I write them as an excuse to curl up on the sofa or in a recliner with your early reader and just laugh together. That's why I do it. And I use my own illustrations because I want to help kids understand you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to stay in the lines all the time. It's okay to imagine a creature that right there's a spot where you can still see a pencil mark. That's okay. It's okay at times just to relax and dream and envision. It's not all about, So that's where those come from. The third Squirdlock book is just coming out at the same time as the adult thing. There's several more Squirdlock books in the works right now. But there are other children's books, too. The first one I ever did was called I Can't Paint My Dog, which was one day I heard my grandson stomping down the hall. He looked at me and said, I can't paint my dog. And it was there. There was a book. So I don't know what he meant, but I saw the book, and that's where it came from. The goal, again, it's just to use the power of stories to help kids escape a little bit, to help them relax and breathe, and to, not to get too heavy, but I think back as a kid, and I'm not one of those who say, oh, better in the old days, but I remember it seems to me we spent more time imagining, what if we could go to the moon? What if? All this kind of stuff. I don't hear a lot about that now. I hear my son talking about this Lego thing he's doing. I love Legos. That's not a slam on them. Or this dinosaur movie, or this, this special character thing. But dreaming about what they could actually do or be in the future of their lives, I don't hear a lot of that. So hopefully the Squirdlock is a character that can just say, hey, what if? It comes back to that same question. What if?
What if?
Yeah.
You have talked a lot about writing stories and helping people tell stories. So as you have gone through your life and you've gone through all of these phases, how, if it does writing fiction differ from those other opportunities where you help people tell stories?
That's a good question. And Really, in most ways, for me, there's not a huge difference. For me, whether I'm writing a kid's book or an adult fiction book or writing another one of the faith-based things I do with CSS Publishing or whatever, my goal is to tell a good story. And the key difference is if I'm doing even when I'm writing curriculum we just rewrote a curriculum, when I do that, we learn best when we're caught up in something. So if we can create learning activities that are experience-driven story activities, it helps. So my primary thing is how do I make this, how do I suck people into this and let them forget they're reading something or learning something? So that's always there. The biggest difference, I think, is when I'm writing nonfiction, I have something I keep having to go back to make sure I'm being true to the facts. I have to do that in the fiction. The world we create with Emily Graham and stuff, although it's fiction, there are still rules to that world. There are things I cannot do. There are things that happen in the first book that happened, and I got to remember that. But there's more, I guess the pressure's more on nonfiction because, it's got to be accurate factually. To me, it's more fun writing fiction. I can let the mind go a little bit more, but there's not a huge difference in the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So, out of that experience and out of your processes in writing, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
There is so much advice out there. I sat down, I did a presentation a month ago for a writers club, and I sat down, just went to Amazon and found 173 books on how to write a story. And those were the free ones. That's not the cost ones. There's so much out there. For me, in my experience, I think a couple of things come to mind. For me, the biggest thing that made a difference was figure out for yourself, why are you writing in the first place? Why are you doing this? It made a huge difference for me. When I finally decided after Dad's comment that I was going to write Disruption, I sat down and said, okay, how do you write a novel? And I started thinking about this. And I read that, make sure you don't do this or you'll get bad reviews. And if you get more than 10 bad reviews, then Amazon's going to do this. And you've got to include this because you've got to get at least 20 reviews. And I just sat there going, holy cow. And then I read this book and listened to this thing. And then one day it finally occurred to me, I'm writing this book just because this is a story I got to get out of my head. I want to write this story. If it gets bad reviews, I wouldn't want that. But okay, I'm not going to worry about that. So when I finally decided or realized why I was writing, it changed the experience for me. Things I was worried about, I didn't worry about anymore. It was freeing. As I worked on the other things, some of the things I'm writing, the things I do with the traditional publisher, I'm writing it to make them happy, to meet the requirements of their market and so forth. So that changes how I approach it and what I need to worry about and pay attention to. But I see so many folks who, what they really want to do is just write these stories for their families or whatever, but they spend so much time worrying like I did. So the first thing is, why are you doing this? If you're doing it just to write, then just write. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about all of the, the commas. Those take care of those later. But just, why are you doing it? If you can answer that, it makes a huge difference. If the reason you're writing it is because you want to get rich, well, we need to talk about that. It could happen, but I don't know that that's a reason to spend the hours, unless you're going to do it for a long time, but whatever. But the first thing to me is, why are you writing? The second thing to me is just sit down and write. When I started out, after I decided to write, I read something from James Patterson who, outline everything, full outline, every chapter and a paragraph for each chapter. And I went, oh, okay. I tried that. Oh my goodness. That did not work for me. I read others with all of these things you should and shouldn't do. And I finally, I just sat down and started writing. I quit thinking and I just sat down and started writing, and Emily showed up and the others showed up, and later I could come back and worry about turning all that into a book. But if you want to write, the secret is just write. Write it, let people look at it, suck up the ego, listen to what they have to say. You don't have to agree with it or do it, but listen. You will learn. I just got, for the next book, I just got notes back from my pre-readers, and they found some things that, cool, so a couple of them could have bruised the ego. But no, so I get it to other people. The main thing, though, is just write. I get with so many people in groups that I want to write one of these days. I want to be a writer. And so what have you written? Well, right now I'm reading this and this. I wonder how many authors there are out there that spend their time reading about writing but never write. Huh. Mm-hmm. That'd be interesting. There's a bunch of them. I was one for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But every author is different. Every writer is different. I've read people that say if you're not writing, 10,000 words a day, you're not a real author. Stephen King, whatever you think of Stephen King, he's got his process every day, even Christmas. He's going to spend time writing. Okay, if that works, fine. If that doesn't work for you, doesn't mean a thing. Just write.
Seems like really good advice to me. We are going to take our final break of the podcast, and when we come back, we will have the conclusion of this interview with JB Jamison. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author JB Jamison about, among other things, his Emily Graham series.
I want to kind of backtrack a little bit, talking about another thing that you've written, which is on your website, you have a serial. So can you talk a little bit about the serial?
The serial that took a vacation, yes. That was started at the end of Disruption, I think, when I didn't have any plans to write another book, another Emily Graham book. Started the serial about Hap Schumann, who is an old guy who stumbles into some interesting things. I got started with that, had a bunch of ideas, and then Emily started screaming again. I've actually started going back now and bringing Hap back. I think I got three editions out in that serial. So yeah, it didn't die, but it it needs to be watered. But it was just another idea, more humor. It's kind of the old guy who turns into the detective type. Not really a detective, but he's out to save the day. But he's just the gnarly old guy with his gnarly old wife, and he ends up stumbling into stuff, and it's more funny than others. I'm eager to get back to it because it was really fun to do, but it's just another that I mentioned a while ago. There's other things I want to do, and that's one of them. I can see Hap taking on a life similar to Emily, very different character, but I can see once he starts up, it's going to be hard to get rid of him or to get him to leave me alone. Put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Right now he's being very polite and letting Emily kind of take the lead.
I'm not sure how polite. I've just stayed away from it. I think that's Hap is. I don't know that he deals with polite. He doesn't have the patience for polite.
Yeah. Okay. What about when you take time to read? What do you have? What are your favorite authors and genres?
Sure. when I just want to read something, I always go back to pull something off my shelf by James Thurber. I love Thurber. As an individual, he was kind of a putz, but the stuff he writes, I just love the way he uses words, the images that he brings to mind just from the use of simple words, and the pictures he paints. I like that. It's a different genre. I wish I could write that. That type of humor he does, but I think Emily Graham takes some of her from him. There's this kind of wry, sarcastic, whatever, and I think that's partly there. Thurber, I'll read a lot. I spend a lot of my time. I go to archive.org, which I've spent more time on than anywhere, and I will spend time reading some of the old pulp stuff, Dashiell Hammett, the old stuff. I love old-time radio, listening and reading the scripts and the stories. And again, it's because those folks, they were storytellers. And radio stuff, it's all words. It's pictures they paint, not that we look at on screen. And I think of some of these writers. I think of I don't know. Patricia Highsmith comes to mind. She did the Mr. Ripley series and others. Some of these folks wrote for radio programs that were on every day of the week. They had to write a new story or, a 20-minute piece of a story every day of the week, 365 days a year. And every one of those had to be true to everything that had happened before. Some of those, the Lone Ranger series, they did one every day of the year, and there was a canon of stuff about the Lone Ranger in history they had to be truthful to, and yet somehow every day add to it and hook people to bring them back tomorrow. Those people knew how to write a chapter. I think as I was writing this last book, it occurred to me a lot of my chapters are short, which is by intention. I like to write a chapter you can read while you're standing in the line at the coffee shop if you need to. But I also realized I'm writing radio serial episodes as chapters. They're short, and I try to end each one with a hook. Come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
But those folks, I've read a lot. I've taken classes on writing stories, how to do this. I've learned more about storytelling and story writing from those old-time radio people, the folks who wrote the old pulp novels that are all available free on archive.org. It's wonderful. I spend a time, at least a couple times every week, looking at Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson, because of the interaction, the realness of those characters. Hobbes is, the tiger. It's amazing. Emily has a lot of Hobbes. She's a Hobbesian if she had to pick a theology. It's this personality of looking at the world that these humans are exhibiting in and going, what are you thinking? There's a lot of that in Emily. Same with Pearls Before Swine, Stephen Pastis. Looking at the situation from a completely different perspective. Those are things. I don't read a lot of modern novels, not because there's anything wrong with them, but there's one reason primarily. A lot of times folks will, talk about something I've written and said, oh, I know where you got that. You got that out of, and they'll name somebody's book. And I can honestly say, nope, haven't read it. No, I don't want to be accused of that. It may be the same, but that's not where I got it.
Right.
So
right.
It's a diverse stuff that I read, but it's all focused on just how do you tell just a darn good story.
Yeah. Thank you. You have a website, so tell people the address of your website and where they can find you on social media.
Sure. Our main website is jamisonbooks.com. And we've got a site, jbjamison.com. They're all under Jamison Books, but you could do JB Jamison or popsjamison.com. We've tried to make it as easy as possible to get there. I am not always the best at keeping the site the most exciting. That's part of the challenge of the self-publishing side of things, which is something I'm still learning. That's probably worth a whole other conversation someday. But we have our website. We're on Facebook at Jamison Books on Facebook. We're on Goodreads. You'll find us there. Of course, Amazon Kindle, the other places like that. But that's where we are. If anybody listening does check us out, I love hearing from folks, storytellers, writers, or wannabes. Just, how's it going? What's going on? What's working? What's not? I'm learning this stuff. I'm a long way from, I'm a writer. That's the other advice. As soon as you type the first letter or write it, you are now a writer. It's no longer, I want to be someday. You are an author. You may not be published yet, but that doesn't matter. So mentally make that change. That jumps us back in the conversation. But if you do visit, say hi, post a note. I try to put stuff on Facebook just to spark ideas and so forth. But if you stop by, please say hi. Would appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We've talked about a lot of topics today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like for people to know about writing or about your books? Anything that we haven't covered?
Let me just say two things at the end. I think the phrase I use a lot, again, with the style of writing that we do, especially for the adult fiction, is the type of stuff, it's only fiction until it happens. The stuff that I write is fiction, but it's all based on stuff that either has happened or has been proven to be possible. And when that first got my real attention is while I was still writing Disruption. I was writing about the FBI when Emily showed up. I didn't know much about the FBI, so I started trying to get in touch with someone at the FBI just to get with them and learn from them. That took a while. Nobody wanted to talk to me. I finally got a meeting with an agent from our area office who's the community liaison, and we met at a coffee shop. And we'd never met, we'd never talked, but I said, I'm writing a book about, and he said, yes, we know. And I stopped. And I went, excuse me? He said, no, go ahead. Go right ahead. And I said, well, I've been doing some research on nuclear. He said, yeah, we know. I said, wait a minute. And we talked a little bit, and I'm starting to glance out the window looking for black vehicles parked out there. And as we're going along, he finally looked at me and said, are you really sure you want to write this book? And I said, are you telling me not to? Oh, no. We would never do that. But I'm just asking, are you sure you want to write this book? And I said, yes, I am. And that was the first of a few contacts I had with him. I ended up being put in touch with a former agent who's gone now. He was one of the agents leading the investigation in the Bernie Madoff thing. He had retired, and he was willing to talk with folks like me. We had several conversations, and when I told him that story, he said, oh, yeah, they're aware. He says, you're looking at things that we're very much aware of. I said, well, should I stop writing? I don't want to give people ideas. He said, oh, they've already got those ideas. Don't worry about that. You write your stories. So this is real stuff, and that's part of the reason I write those is just, hey. But I guess the other main thing, again, I would just say that I said a while ago, if you've ever thought of writing, don't wait until you're 65 to write your first novel. I did that, and it's okay. But when you do that, you start thinking, if I would have just started this at anything before 65. So if you've got any ideas, don't worry about it being any good. Don't worry about what's going to happen to it. Just start writing and see what happens. Enjoy the trip. Okay.
Thank you so much. It has been so much fun to talk with you today. I really appreciate you being a guest.
Well, Sarah, thank you very, very much for the time, and we need to talk more. I've got questions for you one of these days.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you once again to my guest, JB Jamison. John, I'm a little scared about all the questions you want to ask me. Not really. I'm just used to being the one who asks the questions, so I don't know about being on the other side of that. At any rate, thank you again for taking the time out of your weekend to come and talk to me. Thank you, as always, my listeners, for joining me on this podcast journey of books and authors and all of that wonderful stuff. If you are interested in learning more about Emily Graham and finding out about all of the what ifs, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I do have copies of both Disruption and Distraction to give away, so you can jump into the Emily Graham series before Disbelief comes out in a few weeks. It's very easy to enter the giveaway. All you have to do is go to our GSMC book review social media pages. Those links are in the show description. Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and comment on this post. Episode 146, interview with JB Jamison. That's it. Just comment and you'll automatically be entered to win a copy of either Disruption or Distraction. And you can jump into the Emily Graham series. Thank you once again for joining me. I hope you will join me again on Thursday. I realized when I did the Ireland episode last week that there was something that I wanted to talk about that wouldn't quite fit into that episode and needed its own. You're going to have to join me on Thursday to find out what that is. So join me again on Thursday, and in the meantime, get out there and get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.